This is a tough one. You've been looking into the murder of Shauna Tiaff, and it's just one of those cases that really gets under your skin. The more you dig, the more questions you have.
It's like it just grabs you and won't let go. And the setting, Las Vegas, it adds this whole other layer of intrigue. The glitz, the glamour, it almost clashes with the brutality of the crime.
Yeah, that contrast is what struck me too. It's easy to think of Vegas and picture high rollers and celebrities, but this case, it brings us face to face with the reality that even in a city known for its excesses every day, people can become victims of terrible tragedies.
Absolutely. And that's what makes Shauna's story so compelling. She was a cocktail waitress at the Palms, one of the most iconic casinos on the Strip. She wasn't a celebrity or a millionaire. She was a working mom, part of the fabric of the city. And from everything you've uncovered, she was incredibly popular too.
Yeah, she was loved by her coworkers, customers, everyone who knew her. You found some really touching descriptions of her, especially from her sister. It sounds like she had this radiant energy about her.
She did. Bubbly, dedicated to her family, hardworking.
Hmm.
To have that light extinguished so violently, it's just heartbreaking. And it makes you want to understand what happened. How could this happen to someone like Shauna?
So let's try to piece together what we know. We're going to take everything you've gathered and see if we can make some sense of this tragedy. So Shauna moves to Vegas to chase her dreams. She finds success at the Palms, meets George Tiaff, a fireman. They build a life together, have a daughter named Maddie. On the surface, it's the American dream, right?
It seems like it.
Yeah.
The all-American couple, the adorable daughter. But as you dig deeper, you start to see these cracks in the facade, like little fault lines that hint at something darker lurking beneath the surface.
Okay, so let's talk about those cracks. First, there's the financial strain. George was a fireman, so you'd think he'd be financially secure. But you found evidence that he was struggling, especially after the housing market crash.
Yeah, that housing crisis, it hit Vegas hard. People lost their homes, their savings, everything. They were desperate. And for a guy like George, a fireman who's supposed to be the provider, that kind of pressure could be devastating.
It's almost like it attacks their sense of identity, right? Like if they can't provide, they're somehow less of a man.
I think that's a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you combine that with the other things you discovered about their relationship, it starts to paint a very troubling picture.
Right. It wasn't just the money. There was also George's controlling behavior, especially about how Shauna dressed for work at the casino. It sounds like he was very insecure.
Very much so.
Mm.
You know, it's a classic pattern you see in these cases. Financial strain, a feeling of lost control, and then this need to exert control over your partner. It's a recipe for disaster.
Mhm.
And then there's the detail about George bringing a homeless man into their home.
That's the part I just can't wrap my head around. It's so out of left field. Here they are, this seemingly perfect family living in a nice house, and then suddenly there's a homeless man living with them. This doesn't add up.
It's definitely one of the most bizarre details in the case. And for Shauna, it must have been incredibly unsettling. Imagine having a stranger, someone with an unstable background, living under the same roof as your young daughter. It's a huge violation of your safe space.
No kidding. And then just weeks before the murder, their home is burglarized. Now, this is where things get really interesting. What was taken? Anything valuable?
Some of Shauna's personal items were stolen, including her wedding ring. But the strangest thing is what the burglar left behind.
Wait, what? What did they leave?
A pair of small boxer shorts.
Seriously? I mean, what's that about? Is it a clue? A threat? Was someone trying to send a message?
It's like something out of a movie, isn't it? This bizarre, almost symbolic item left behind at the scene. And it really makes you wonder who would know Shauna's lingerie style well enough to choose those particular boxers.
Right. It's not like they just grabbed any random pair of underwear from the drawer. This feels deliberate, like someone was trying to tell us something.
Exactly. And when we connect this to the bigger picture, George's controlling behavior, the tension in the home, this strange, almost symbolic item, it raises some very unsettling possibilities.
So who are we looking at here? A jealous coworker, someone obsessed with Shauna, maybe even someone trying to frame George.
Those are all excellent questions. And they're the questions that investigators had to grapple with as they tried to piece together this very complicated puzzle. And remember, at this point, the police don't know about all the other stuff. The tension in the marriage, the financial problems, all they see is this seemingly happy couple. And a burglary like this, it can easily fit into a narrative of a husband snapping under pressure.
It's like planting a seed of doubt, right?
Yeah.
Making everyone look at George a little differently.
Exactly. It's subtle, but it's effective. And it adds this whole other layer of complexity to the case.
Wow.
So we've got this unsettling break-in just weeks before Shauna's murder. And then, tragically, she's killed. You've pieced together the timeline of that night. She finished her shift at the Palms a little after 3 a.m.
Right, and there's surveillance footage of her leaving the casino.
That footage is crucial because it establishes a timeline. They know she left work at 3:05 a.m. and arrived home around 3:30. But sadly, someone was waiting for her inside.
And the details of the attack, they're just horrific. You've read the reports Shauna was beaten to death with a hammer. That kind of violence, it speaks to a level of rage, maybe even a personal vendetta.
It's definitely not your typical burglary. Most burglars want to get in and out quickly, grab valuables, and disappear. But to use a weapon like that, and one found at the scene no less, it suggests a level of comfort, a familiarity with the surroundings.
You mentioned the hammer being from the house. Does that automatically point to someone Shauna knew? Or could an intruder have just grabbed it in the heat of the moment?
That's a good question. It's not impossible for an intruder to use a weapon of opportunity, but it does add another layer of risk. It suggests they were comfortable enough to spend time searching for a weapon, which is unusual in a burglary gone wrong. It makes you wonder if maybe it was staged to look like a random act of violence.
To throw off the investigation.
Exactly, to make it seem less personal, less targeted.
So when the police arrived, suspicion naturally fell on George. I mean, he was the one who found her body.
It's a common assumption in cases like this. Statistically, the husband is often the perpetrator. But George had an alibi. He was working a 24-hour shift at the firehouse.
So he was literally at work the entire time.
His colleagues confirmed he was there all night. Now, alibis can be tricky, but in this case, multiple people corroborated his story, and there's no indication they were covering for him.
Okay, so with George seemingly ruled out, what avenues did investigators explore? Did they have any other suspects in mind?
They looked into a few different angles. One theory focused on Shauna's work at the Palms. Cocktail waitresses, especially those working late shifts, they interact with hundreds of people every night. And those interactions aren't always pleasant.
Yeah, you're dealing with drunk people, maybe turning down unwanted advances. It could easily make someone a target.
Exactly. So they interviewed everyone they could find who knew Shauna, from the casino coworkers, regular customers, anyone who might have had a reason to harm her.
Did anything concrete come out of those interviews?
Unfortunately, no. They encountered some shady characters and heard stories of bar fights and jealous exes, but nothing that directly linked anyone from the casino to Shauna's murder.
What about the burglary a few weeks before? Did they investigate that angle further?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The timing was too close to ignore. They looked into whether it was random or somehow connected to the murder. The stolen items, especially Shauna's wedding ring, and that bizarre clue of the small boxer shorts, it all hinted at a possible connection.
Did they have any luck tracing the stolen goods, maybe pawn shops or attempts to resell the ring?
They explored those avenues, but the trail went cold. The items never resurfaced, and they couldn't find anyone with information about the burglary.
So we have a dead end with the casino angle and a dead end with the burglary. Where did the investigation go from there? Did they ever identify a motive?
That's one of the most frustrating things about this case. The motive remains a mystery. Robbery doesn't seem likely given that valuable items were left untouched at the crime scene. It could have been a crime of passion, a personal vendetta, but they haven't been able to pin down a suspect who fits that profile.
It sounds like investigators had a lot of puzzle pieces, but couldn't quite put them together.
That's a great analogy. They had the timeline, the crime scene details, witness statements, but the key pieces were missing. A definitive motive, a suspect with a clear link to Shauna, and forensic evidence tying someone to the crime.
What about DNA evidence? With a crime this violent, you'd think there'd be some trace of the killer left behind.
You would think so, and they did collect samples from the scene. However, none of those samples matched anyone in their databases, and to this day they haven't had a hit.
So years later, the case remains unsolved. That must be incredibly frustrating for Shauna's family and friends.
Absolutely. The lack of closure is one of the hardest things for families in these cases. They're left with the grief of losing a loved one and the constant question of why. It's like a wound that never fully heals.
It's heartbreaking to think about Shauna's daughter Maddie growing up without her mom and with this cloud of mystery hanging over her life.
It's a tragedy on so many levels. And in a city like Las Vegas, with its constant churn of entertainment and spectacle, it's easy for a case like this to fade from public memory.
But for those who knew and loved Shauna, the pain and the search for answers never goes away. What's especially troubling is that this happened in a city that prides itself on safety and control.
That's the irony, isn't it?
Yeah.
Las Vegas is this carefully constructed world of illusions where everything seems bright and shiny. But this case, it cracks that facade, revealing the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface.
And it makes you wonder, could this happen again? Is there someone out there who got away with murder who might even be living a seemingly normal life right now.
It is. It's chilling to think about. And it really makes you think about Las Vegas as the backdrop for this whole thing.
Yeah, you've been looking into this case, so I'm curious what stands out to you about Vegas. What's its role in this tragedy?
You know, when you work on cases like this, you start to see how the location can almost become another character in the story. And Las Vegas, well, it's a city built on this paradox, isn't it? It's this place of second chances, reinvention, but it's also a city where secrets can so easily get buried.
Yeah, it's like that saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. It takes on a whole new meaning when you're talking about an unsolved murder.
Exactly. It makes you wonder if the city itself somehow shielded the killer, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Did someone use the anonymity of the crowds, the transient nature of the city, to just disappear? Or did the constant focus on entertainment and spectacle, did that distract from the search for justice?
It's hard to say. We may never know for sure, but it's definitely something to think about. And for Shauna's family, for her daughter Maddie, I mean, how do they navigate this immense loss without any real answers?
I can't even imagine. It's impossible to fathom the pain and frustration they must endure. Not only have they lost a beloved daughter, sister, and mother, but they're also denied the closure that comes with knowing who took her from them and why. That's got to be such a heavy burden to carry.
It is. It's a reminder that for every unsolved case out there, there are families and loved ones left behind grappling with grief and this profound sense of injustice.
It's a stark reminder that even in a city like Vegas with all the glitz and glamour, real lives are at stake. Shauna's story, it pierces through that facade. It reminds us that behind the bright lights and the casinos, there are human beings with hopes and dreams and vulnerabilities.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Shauna Tiaff's case, we're left with more questions than answers. But you've done an amazing job pulling together all these different perspectives and pieces of the puzzle. So based on what you've learned, what's your gut feeling? Do you think Shauna's work at the casino played a role in her murder, or was this a purely personal tragedy?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that investigators are still trying to answer. You know, the casino with all its characters and its late-night atmosphere, it certainly offers a lot of potential suspects and motives. But then you have the personal side, the marital troubles, the financial strain, that unsettling presence of the homeless man in their home. It's impossible to ignore those factors.
It's almost like we're looking at two separate mysteries that somehow converge in this one tragic event. Was Shauna's murder the result of some chance encounter at the casino? A dangerous entanglement with a gambler? A disgruntled coworker? Or was it something closer to home, something born out of desperation, jealousy, or a need for control?
You know what they say? The truth is often stranger than fiction. And in a city like Las Vegas, where reality and illusion are constantly intertwining, it's possible that the answer lies somewhere in between. Maybe it was a combination of factors, a perfect storm of personal and professional circumstances that led to this tragic outcome.
Well, it's a case that definitely makes you think, and one that I'm sure will stay with our listeners long after this deep dive. We encourage you to keep digging, keep questioning, and maybe with time and continued attention, Shauna's story will find its resolution and bring some peace to those who love her.